Hey there, welcome back to OmegaCodex. I am Sanal. Today I have got something interesting lined up for you. Have you ever felt lost in the labyrinth of .NET configuration? Configuration in .NET can be as puzzling as navigating through a maze without a map. In this video, we are going to simplify it step by step. We'll delve into the secrets of .NET configuration, unraveling how it works and why it matters. Whether you are a seasoned developer or just starting out on your coding journey, this is a topic that can save you countless hours of frustration and debugging. By the end of this video, you will have clear understanding of .NET configuration and how to wield its power effectively. So hit that subscribe button and don't forget to like the video. So let's get started. Configuration in .NET is all about managing and accessing various settings and options that your .NET application needs to run smoothly. Configuration includes things like database connection strings, application settings, API endpoints, feature toggles, authentication settings, and much more. It is essential for getting your application work just the way you want it. But why is configuration so crucial? Because it allows developers to keep their application code separate from the configuration data. And this separation brings some incredible benefits. Firstly, it gives you more flexibility. You can change your application behavior without touching the code. This is particularly handy when you're deploying to different environments like development, testing, or production. Next, it makes it more secure. With configuration, you can protect sensitive information like passwords, API keys, and connection strings by storing them securely in configuration files or external sources, like key vaults. It also makes your application more maintainable. You can tweak its behavior and settings without needing to recompile your code. This reduces the risk of introducing bugs during code changes. And don't forget portability. You can easily share your configuration settings across different instances of the same application, making deploying and managing applications at scale a breeze. .NET provides a robust configuration system that efficiently manages these settings. It can read configuration data from various sources like appsettings.json, which is commonly used in ASP.NET Core projects. It also pulls data from environment variables, command line arguments, and even supports file formats like XML or INI. Configuration is set up using one or more configuration providers. These providers read configuration data from various sources. iConfiguration interface provides a unified view of the configuration data. Configuration is read-only and the pattern isn't designed to be programmatically written. The iConfiguration interface is a single representation of all configuration sources as shown here. Let's start with a small example using a console app. I have a console application here. .NET console applications created using .NET New command or Visual Studio by default does not expose configuration capabilities. So to start with, we need to add a package, Microsoft.extensions.configuration. This package is the foundation of configuration in .NET. So let's open the terminal and add our package. So once the package is added, you can start with something like configuration equal to new configuration builder, which is what helps you in loading your configuration. So here let's add in-memory collection, and I'll have a new dictionary and I'll have some value key1 equal to key value, and after that build. So now if we do console.writeLine and configuration and try to get our value, we can fetch it from the configuration variable. So you can see that our value is printed from the configuration. So what essentially it does is it creates a new instance of configuration builder. Then it is adding an in-memory collection of key value pairs in the configuration builder. And when we call the builds method, it is creating an iConfiguration instance. And after that, we are writing that value of the configuration into the console. Now here we used an in-memory collection, but there are many other providers available for file-based environment variables, command line arguments, and other configuration sources. For example, we can add Microsoft.extensions.configuration.json package, and after that we will be able to do add JSON file where we can just mention, say, appsettings.json, and it will load the values. If we have an appsettings file in our application, it will load the values from the appsettings.json. Now, this is a bare minimum approach to load your configurations, but commonly the recommended approach is to use a .NET host approach. We obviously will be doing more than just reading our configurations, right? So we will be using dependency injections, logging, or other services. So in that case, we can use another package which is called Microsoft.extensions.hosting. After that, let's comment this out and just call using ihost host.create application builder, and let's just put the arguments and .build. Then we can just call await host.run async. Host.create application builder method provides a default configuration for the app. It automatically adds the configuration sources. After that, to get our configuration value, let's do something like configuration equal to host.services get required service iConfiguration. So we'll get a instance of iConfiguration, and let's do console.writeLine key1 equal to configuration key1. Now when we run this, there is nothing to be displayed because we removed the in-memory collection and we haven't added configuration value anywhere. We don't have an app setting set for this application to load it from there. So what we can do right now, let's come to the launch settings, and we can add the command line arguments, and we are setting the value here. So here we as I was mentioning, there are multiple providers which are added one after another. So we will be leveraging the command line arguments provider. Now let's come back to our application and run it this time. So now the configuration value is set for the key, and it is loading from our command line argument, which is like one of the highest priorities in the list. So configuration values can contain hierarchical data. For example, let's create an app settings file for a project. Let's call it app settings and remove this command line argument. And make sure that the copy to output directory is copy always in this case, because otherwise it will not be able to load it. And then when we run, it is picking up from the key value where in the appsettings.json. And if you cross check, we have removed the command line arguments. So now it's only getting it from the app settings value. And to demonstrate it further, it's coming as key value 2. Now the configuration values can have hierarchical data. Say for example, we have settings like app settings, and then you have API. Inside that you have API URL, probably you have an email config, and inside that you have hostname. So if you want to fetch this information in your configuration, then it is retrieved using the colon delimiter. Call it app settings, and we'll say app settings.api URL. So now when we run it, we can see it is picking up from the app settings, and it is referred using the colon delimiter. So for each hierarchical position, you can add one delimiter and get to the next level. So say if we want to have email config, and then we have hostname, and run it, So now see, it is picking up from the third level of the configuration. Now with binder, we can actually bind it to .NET objects as well. So let's create class called settings and have some properties. So now we have specific .NET classes for our settings, where we have app settings, the API URL, timeout seconds, and then we have the email config. And now instead of this, we can do configuration.get section, and we can call the app settings section, and we can map it to the settings object. So now if we have settings, let's update it to API URL and settings.API URL, and here we will have settings.emailconfig.hostname. Let's put a breakpoint and run it. And now if we come and check the settings object, we can see that it has loaded those values into our object. So we have timeout seconds, API URL, and the email config as well. And if we just go ahead and run it, we can see those values being fetched in the console as well. Now if you are not using the host approach, even then you can do it just using the configuration builder. Let's comment this out and bring our configuration builder up. And here so in this case, we'll have to obviously add our appsettings.json manually. And let's remove this in-memory collection and then do a build. And now if we run it, we'll be able to achieve the same functionality. So we can see that app settings is loaded and the values are also loaded in the object. And if we run it, we can see them coming up in the console as well. Now another capability is to be able to load these values if it has a array based structure. So like for example, let's say we have a list of IP addresses and we want to load it. So we could have public string array IP address, and now when we run it, we can see that we have IP addresses as well properly mapped to an array. Now if we want to do the same functionality using just the configuration object, you can access it using like that address and 0. So for the 0th index, so if you want to fetch it by index using the string keys to access this data, you can get it this way. So now when we get the IP address, you can see it got the first IP address using the indexer property. So if you have an array based structure in the hierarchy, you can access each element with the index of its position, and it applies to the complex structures as well. For example, if you have complex structure here where IP and say status true, let's remove this for now, or let's just put one more and we'll access the second index this time. So true, and we'll call it false. So here on the 0 based index, I want the IP and I want the status. So let's comment this for now, because otherwise it will create a problem, because it will not be able to serialize onto this. And let's try running this. So now if you come here, you can see that for 0 it is fetching the values. Let's change it to 1, and now you can see it is fetching the next value which is available in the array. So this way, using the index values of each item in the array, you can fetch or you can access the properties. Now in most cases we would be using configurations with a web application. So let's jump to a web application, make it a startup project, and probably just copy these settings here. And first let's see how the configuration providers are fetched. So here, if you can see, I have injected iConfiguration root in the home controller, and if you come to the program.cs. So in the .NET Core applications, it usually starts with WebApplication.createBuilder, which is the host approach for a web application. With this itself, it takes care of loading the app settings and other environment variables for the application. So let's just run this to see the order of configuration providers. So here we can see in the order which it is fetched or it was added to the sources list. So it starts with the memory configuration provider, which is the in-memory collection. Then you have the environment variables configuration provider, starting with prefixes of ASP.NET Core and also .NET. So these are the prefixes used by .NET Core itself, and it's mostly used for ASP.NET's hosting configurations. So it's generally meant for those. If you want to use your own prefixes, then you have to use a different one. Then we have the JSON config provider, which loads the app settings. Then it's an optional step. And then we have appsettings.development.json, which is also an optional step. And if these files are available, then it is loaded. Then it loads the environment configuration with no prefixes, or if you have a custom prefix, even that comes up here. And then you have the chained configuration provider in the end. So if we come to the home controller, and let's just remove this and try to achieve the same thing which we were doing in the console application. So we'll just call our config root and then call the get section to load our app settings, and we'll bind it to app settings. We just copy our classes from here and probably add a class called app settings and put it here. So now we have our IP addresses as well. Okay, and let's make it an array of. So once we come to controller, URL as settings.api URL, and then hostname settings.emailconfig.hostname. So let's try running this, and now we have those values being fetched in the controller using I configuration, which we injected into the home controller. But now in an ideal scenario, we wouldn't want to inject the whole I configuration in all the classes where we want to get our configuration values. Then we use something called as options pattern, where we can set up a dependency injection for the app settings itself. So wherever we want to use app settings, we would set up a dependency injection for the app settings object itself, and we'll inject those values. To do that, we will come to programs.cs and we'll call builder.services.configure, and we want to configure app settings, and here we have to pass an I configuration. So for that, we'll do builder.configuration.get section, and we can do name of app settings. So since our settings name also is app settings, we can just use name of app settings. But if it is a different string value in the appsettings.json, then we have to use the actual string value. And now when we come to home controller, what we have to inject is an IOptions object, IOptions of app settings, which is part of the extensions.options namespace, and we can call it app setting options. Let's call it that. Let's comment this out and create a property field for this. Now when we are accessing it, we can just call setting options.value, since app setting options is an object of IOptions of app settings. So the app settings actually is inside the value property of this object. We can also remove this, and now if we run, you can see that it is showing the same values. And let's try to get something else. We call from address of this app settings.value.email config from, and let's also have IP address, maybe let's call the count. Let's run it. So now we can see API URL, hostname, from, and the IP address count. We had put two sets of IP address objects. So there the count is 2. With the web application, we also have this appsettings.development.json, and where it helps is that when we want to have different variations based on our environment, and some values we want to change when we want to use the development. So let's just copy this whole app settings, and here in development, and let's call it, say, dev with smtp dev. Timeout settings, I don't want it. From, I'll keep the same, or other values I just want the same. Here, let's say, let's put it 198, 198, 110, 120, and probably have one more setting as 130. So now when to use these files is determined by the ASP.NET Core environment property. So if you come to properties and see the debug portion, so here you can see that the environment variable ASP.NET Core environment is set to development, and based on this it identifies whether it has to use this file or not. So this value is matched with whatever is there in between. Okay, so now let's try running it and see what we get. So now, since we have added values to the development JSON, we are expecting that those values would be picked up. So now if you come, you can see that the API URL is the dev one, smtp dev, which we changed. From is still coming. It's not that since we didn't put it in development, it is not there. It is still picking up what was there in appsettings.json, and even the IP address count has changed to number 3. Now, it is not advisable to put your sensitive values in these files, even in app settings files. So if you have sensitive values, it should be fetched from some key vault or some external sources, or even environment variables, and not put here, because this is part of your source code, and when you commit the code, it would be available in your repositories, and we wouldn't want to expose those sensitive values or passwords to everybody. So even when you are working on your development environment, the recommended approach is to use user secrets. So for that, you can just click here and select this manage user secrets, and then it opens the secret.json, which is not part of your source code. It is created in your local machine, and you can put the same values there. So let's see, let's try to put something in secrets.json, and host name, let's put secret, and I'll just remove this. Now let's try running our file. We can see that now the host name is changed to whatever was in our secrets file, because it is loaded even after the environment.json. So this is useful when we are working with development environment. If you want to know more about it, you can check out this video displayed on the screen, and the link is available on the top corner. Now we can also load values from environment variables, and the environment variable is loaded even after the app settings, as we saw in the providers list when we were checking earlier. And to work with environment variables, they are accessed similarly like we were accessing as using direct keys, the hierarchical keys separated by semicolons. But the recommended approach for environment variables is to use double underscore. Instead of using semicolon, we have to use double underscore when we are setting those values. We want to set this value, for example, this is how you would set up in an environment variable. Semicolon still works for Windows machines, but then when you are hosting it with Linux, then it doesn't work and it causes issues with Bash. So the recommended approach for setting up environment variables is to use double underscore even if it is Windows or Linux. But while accessing it in the code, you still have to access it using the delimiter colon. So let's try setting up one environment variable. For setting environment variables, we can use either set or setx command. So I'll use setx and app settings, email config, hostname. That's the value we have, app settings, and we have to use double underscore. And the value for this, we will put env in.com, and then we'll put /m to make it a system environment. If you don't put /m, it becomes a user environment. Either ways, it doesn't matter. If you are doing it in local, then it runs for your user, it will anyways pick up that. But if you are doing it on a server, then probably you'll have to use /m to make it on Windows. So now the specified value was saved. Now to fetch these values properly, I'll have to restart the Visual Studio. So let's pause here and I'll restart and come back. So now I've restarted my editor, and let's see what we get when we run it. So now if you see, we have our configuration and a host name is coming from our environment variable. I still have my development JSON, which is set to SMTP dev, and I also have the app settings JSON, which is just set up to smtp.domain, but it is still picking up from the environment because that is loaded even after this. It has no problem in binding that value to our .NET object even when we have specified it in a different format, and that is the format how you specify it in an environment variable. And this is helpful also when you are working with cloud PaaS services like Azure App Service, where you have an app settings page in the portal itself, and you can mention your environment variables or the application settings as environment variables there. Now you could also have your own prefixes for environment variables, like you can have builder.configuration.environment variables, and you can mention my custom prefix. Let's call it my prefix to be simpler. I can set something like this as my prefix, and let's call it my prefix environment, and the value is saved. And let me restart the editor. Now I've restarted my editor, and let's run and see what we get. Now it's loading the values based on the prefix which I added for my environment values. If we come and check these environment variables, and see I have these app settings underscore email config as well as my prefix app settings, but here it still loads from the my prefix one because that is added later after the non-prefix one. And what .NET does is that it removes that prefix from the app settings and it loads the rest, loads based on the rest of the part of the key. And one important thing to note is that you don't miss this underscore after your prefix. You have to put the whole prefix which is to be trimmed off before your configuration key. So that sums up on the basic details about how configuration in .NET is handled, and you can use it for any kind of application, and it would depend on how you want to set it up, whether you are using the configuration builder or you are using the host approach. The benefit with host approach is that it lets you load all the default configuration providers in a specified order. Of course, when you are working with configuration builder, you have more control on the order and you can add your configurations based on whatever sources you want to use. Also, with the app settings and the appsettings.environment JSON files, you can have different settings for each of the environments you are working with. Only thing you have to make sure is that you are not putting any sensitive data there. For sensitive data, for such configuration data, use user secrets for your development environment, and you can also use environment variables for your server environments where you can put these values, or you can also use key vaults. For example, you can use Azure Key Vault, probably a topic for another video, how to integrate with Azure Key Vault. We can cover it in one of the future videos. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you learned something new today, and this video helped in improving your understanding about configuration in .NET. Let me know your comments and feedback in the comment section below. I've also added some reference links in the description box below, so don't forget to check them out. If you want to understand more about how to manage user secrets in configuration, you can check out this video. You can also find something interesting to watch next here. Thanks for staying till the end. See you in the next one. Till then, adios.